How rude.
How rude.
How rude.
How rude.
How rude. How rude. How rude. How rude.
Egad! What am I saying?
Welcome everybody to episode 2 of the January 15th, 2016 edition. Assuming we release these things on Friday, we're still sort of playing through with the release dates. We're going to try to keep a week-to-week consistency there. I'm your podcast host, Josh Kiser. Joining me today, my two buddies, Haddix.
Hello.
And Hougie. How you guys doing?
Fantastic.
Very good. Very good.
So, I wanted to kind of open things up real quick with a little follow-up from last week's podcast. So, obviously, one of the biggest conversation pieces, and rightfully so, given that the original trilogy could not have happened really without this person, is a quick little tidbit on Porkins. I feel like we did a disservice not talking enough about him last time. I don't know how you guys.
I feel like we only gave him 10 minutes. I think
we could probably do a whole podcast on just Porkins if we really wanted to. So
I agree. So I just wanted to clarify something, and this is going off the Star Wars wiki page. So take it for what it's worth. I'm assuming that they are pretty well fact-checked, but originally Hookins was considered for the stand-in for Jabba the Hutt when we discussed about how there's a human Jabba originally. But Hookins read the script, decided he wasn't sure about it, and took a different job elsewhere, like another filming job. When he finished with that, because, let's be honest, Hootkins was probably a well sought after actor at this time.
Oh, yeah. High demand. He learned
that they're still seeking actors to play rebel pilots and decided to take one of the parts. And this, Haddix, is probably what you had read somewhere, is basically Hootkins knew that there's going to be a lot of makeup and costumes design and things like that with these movies. He saw that the character's name was Porkins, and he thought it might mean that he was going to play a pig-like creature.
Okay.
But he talked to Lucas, and Lucas confirmed that the character's species was human. So, again, Lucas must have created a human character named Porkins, and he decided to take it. Now, one additional thing is the Rebel pilot uniforms had been made to a standard size, and Hookins' costume had to be slit down the back in order for him to fit into it.
Oh, Porkins.
Slightly exposing his Mr. Natural t-shirt underneath. He was cramped into a small cockpit for this character's explosive death scene, and he originally thought the actors playing the Death Star crew members had better roles, but he would later consider himself lucky to have played one of the film's heroic rebels.
And no truer words were ever said. R.I.P. Porkins.
R.I.P. Porkins.
I just thought we did a little bit of a disservice to Porkins last time, and thought we'd give him the respect he needed.
I agree. We were not informed enough on Mr. Hootkins, a.k.a. Did they ever even say his first name, or was it just Porkins? Last name? Maybe that's his first name? I don't fucking know.
That is his last name. His first name is Jack, J-E-K, and his middle name is Tono. So
Jack Tono Porkins.
Jack Tono Porkins, JTP, as he's known on the streets.
Oh, man.
But yes, so, and there's actually an extended universe, which, much like Porkins, R.I.P., the extended universe, there is much more stories and novels and stuff like that. He has a whole origin and, background stories and things like that and how he grew up. And speaking of origins, we're going to go ahead and discuss the origins of Anakin Skywalker and some of the other characters that came out in the prequel trilogies on today's podcast. That's how you segue from Porkins into the original trilogies right there, guys.
I want to throw out there that was not a planned segue.
No, not whatsoever.
That might sound planned. That was not a planned segue. So
that was just right. We're just rolling with it.
That's right off the cuff right there. Ladies and gentlemen, Josh Kiser.
What can I say? Two weeks into a podcast host, and I've already got this shit down.
We're pretty much on cruise control at this point. Oh, by the way, before we actually go into the meat of this, before we peel the banana, if you will.
This guy already talking food, and we're only in episode 2.
I do want to say real quick, I appreciate a lot of the feedback we've already been getting. I've been getting a lot of text messages and emails.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes.
And we've already gotten a couple followers on Twitter. Once again, that is at Pseudo Nerd Pod. So go ahead and follow us. We can update you on when we do our recordings and what we're going to be talking about. Every once in a while, we'll get on there and post something stupid. So either way, it's worth following just for those little bits. But yeah, we've had a couple of friends of ours, a couple colleagues that I work with. A lot of them have listened to the podcast. They've had nothing but good things to say. So I definitely appreciate any kind of feedback, but it's also reassuring that most of it's been positive.
Yeah, no, and actually, any negative feedback we hear too, we'd appreciate that too. If I know we heard a little bit of Haddix's mic situation, and we're going to work on that, and we're trying something different with him today, so maybe he won't sound like he's talking through a tunnel. And anything else, content-wise, if anybody's too loud, too quiet, whatever, let us know. So we appreciate it all. At Pseudo Nerd Pod on Twitter. So.
Yep, and if you go there, it'll have our Google Plus page, which will also have all of our live broadcasts. It's also linked to our YouTube channel. So all the information is at the Twitter at Pseudo Nerd Pod.
So now that you guys have totally killed the flow into
I was about to say, dude. Great segue.
Let's get into it. So like I said, we're going to discuss the prequels today. And this all started because Episode 5, we discussed this last time, but basically in Episode 5, which at the time was going to be Episode 2, Lucas was working on the script and eventually decided that Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, was going to be Luke's father. You know, at the time of Episode 4, New Hope, that wasn't going to be the case. And actually at the time they were Episodes 1 and 2. When he decided that Anakin was going to be Darth Vader, he said it changed the whole layout of the story that he had imagined, and realized now he was writing the saga and was in the middle of it. And there was actually, 3 episodes prior to A New Hope. And that's sort of where the whole story is based off of. These prequels were supposed to be the origins of Darth Vader. And while there's going to be plenty of other stories taking place, the main focus was going to be Darth Vader. And I know Lucas never thought that these were going to get made. He thought the technology at the time wasn't going to be able to support some of the scenes he had in mind. Coruscant being this city planet, he thought that they would never be able to do justice to it. He pictured Yoda with lightsaber battles and fighting, and didn't think with the puppet technology they used that was ever going to look realistic enough on camera. Well, eventually the technology and industrial lights and magic got to the point where they could do that, and next thing you know, here come the prequels. So I don't know about you guys, but we sort of discussed last time that we were pretty excited. The Phantom Menace, the announcement of the Phantom Menace sort of pushed the special editions to be re-released, and that sort of got us into it. So by the time Phantom Menace came out, were you guys, excited for the movie? Were you ready to, see where these new trilogies the new trilogy was going to take us, or were you not sure? Were you not really into the Star Wars thing at the Phantom Menace release?
At the Phantom Menace release, I was not. I was more excited that they were releasing the toys again. Like between like 95, 94, 95, 96, they really started pushing the toys. I think that was around the time too that some of the production and ideas were starting to be put into the first movie. Lucas, being the merchandising genius that he is, decided put the have all these series of toys by Galoob, the Micro Machines, and all that stuff, the action figures, and keep it fresh in kids' minds because once again we were at an age in '95, we were 10 years old. Anything that we knew about Star Wars was probably something we either stumbled upon on TV. I don't think any of us were actively going out to watch those movies because it wasn't something that we were really that crazy into at the time. I would say I got more into. I think honestly, it probably took till about the announcement of episode 2 when I really got excited because I didn't even know that they were making another trilogy. That's how much I was in the dark about this.
Not in the dark side, though, right?
Yuck, yuck, yuck.
So, I would probably agree to a degree. I think I probably had a little more excitement for it. But the prequels get a lot of hate. And justifiably so, I think. And it all starts with Anakin Skywalker. The hype for the prequels and the whole basis for these prequels are the creation of the origin story of Anakin Skywalker. You have Darth Vader, one of the baddest villains of all time, one of the coolest villains of all time, and you're going to finally see how this guy, what tormented, what turned him to the dark side. And then you get Phantom Menace, and you get this 10-year-old boy with that bowl haircut.
That you rocked when you were probably that age.
That's true. But, yelling, yippee! Which is still one of the worst lines in a trilogy filled with terrible lines. And I don't know how you felt, Haddix, but did they do a disservice to the Anakin Skywalker origin?
I think, and I did a lot of reading on this, and it's all opinion-based, obviously, and the majority of the people, I think, like us, were not fans of Anakin Skywalker, how he was portrayed, either the young Skywalker or the older one that comes in episode 2 and 3. But I think the worst thing about it is the trilogy, the original trilogy, ended on this note where you actually felt empathy for Darth Vader because he gave up the dark side for his son. He kind of, his last, I guess, moment, alive was good. So you're going into this episode 1 all these years later, kind of with this hope and, like wanting to root for this guy because eventually he's, going to be good.
Himself.
Yeah,
right.
He redeems himself. And they just did a horrible job at keeping that momentum going. I think young Anakin was, like, oversimplified and how easily Qui-Gon got him to leave his mom. He was like, okay, yeah, I'll see you later. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a great point because, and for those of you who haven't seen the prequels, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
But
spoilers, we're going to talk about them.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Anakin, you start out, he's a 10-year-old boy. Maybe he's 8. I don't know his exact age. He's a young.
According to Weird Al,
kid.
he was 9.5.
9. Okay, well there you go. So you got this young boy who is from a single parent, a mother, and we'll get into that whole birth thing in a minute. And to your point, he's much the mama's boy because that's all he has, and they even play into that in episode 2 when she gets killed by the pretty much gets killed by the sand people and for all intents and purposes, probably raped and violated and whatever else. And he goes ape shit and, kills everybody. And that's sort of the first real darkness taking over.
Turn to the dark side, yeah.
So you can tell he's got this very close relationship with his mom. And to your point, Qui-Gon's like, I'd like to take him to the Jedi Council. And he's like, all right, Mom, see you later.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like shits all over his mom, basically. And she's a slave still, so you would think he would for sure want to stay there.
Right, exactly. And they sort of bounce in between with him, like, really caring about his mom, and then, like, also, like, well, he sort of just walked right out. That was it. Yeah. Now, I guess she gave him the blessing and all that, so maybe he was like, all right. But I never felt right about that.
So
now, of course...
Let me play devil's advocate, because I'm going to do this a lot, because I feel like there are too many people that shit on these movies. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of them either, but I understand where they're coming from with some of the stuff that they did wrong. So, like, for me, having a 9-year-old kid, Anakin Skywalker being, kind of oversimplified. I mean, he's 9 years old. He's not going to have much of a plot. He's from Tatooine. He's a scrap junker for the most part. He's not going to have much of a story to begin with. It's going to develop in time. I think the choice of actor is worse. Yeah, I guess. But to me, what they're trying to also do is tell you that Vader and Anakin, they might as well just be two different people. So when someone says Vader was an ass kicker, well, that's not really Anakin Skywalker. The moment that he turned to the dark side, Anakin died. There was no more Anakin at that point. And I think they're trying to start that off with that at the beginning, with 9-year-old Anakin really being about as awkwardly, pristinely innocent as humanly possible, with this great potential. And then you slowly see how he progresses.
Right, and the birth of Anakin, of course, there's no father, and the mother says it's pretty much born of the Holy Spirit sort of thing. And what the Lucas came up with is this term of midichlorians, which is basically this life force. And that did not sit well with anybody as far as the midichlorians go. And I know, Haddix, you wanted to speak on this, so I'll just pass it over to you and let you say your piece on midichlorians.
Well, and it's not, I guess it's not in defense or against midichlorians, because I do think that how they brought it up and even bringing it up was either confusing or just kind of maybe unnecessary. But while looking through some things, I came across a post that somebody wrote that talked about back before any of the prequels came out. Apparently Lucas had mentioned midichlorians and wanted to bring them into the original trilogy, but didn't think that there was a good way to do it, thought it would be too confusing, so he decided not to. And then he thought, going back to Anakin's origin, it would make more sense. And obviously a lot of people still don't like it. But there's an excerpt here from I guess it's in a book called, where the hell is it? The Making of Star Wars, the definitive story behind the original film. And he says, it is said certain creatures are born with a higher awareness of the Force than humans. Their brains are different. They have more midichlorians in their cells. So, and apparently that was a quote from something that, like an interview or something that he had back in late 70s, early 80s. So it wasn't
never implemented into the actual stories.
Again, thought it was maybe a little too weird to put in there, or just didn't have the right platform to describe it, so he decided not to. Again, I think it was kind of forced in the prequels as well, and then they never really mentioned it again.
To your point there, I just was curious because I was thinking the same thing. They sort of mention it, and I wonder if they just cut it out.
Well, they do talk about it when Palpatine is having a conversation with older Anakin, and he talks about how Darth Plagueis could use midichlorians to create life.
Right. So there is I've just pulled it up here. How many times it is mentioned 5 times. Phantom Menace. It's mentioned 3 different episodes of the Clone Wars, and then Revenge of the Sith. To your point there, those are the only points that midichlorians are ever discussed.
And I think it is. I mean, a lot of people, like looking this up, a lot of people comment on, saying, "Oh, the Force is strong with this one." Could kind of be like a head nod to it, like, "Oh, they have more midichlorians." They just never use that word,
right? And that's fair. And I don't really. It's the term midichlorians doesn't bother me. The idea behind it really doesn't bother me. It's more so, I think the fact that he was born of midichlorians is kind of what bothers me.
I agree. And it seemed like a convenient way for them to find out that, I mean, they took his blood and found out, he has a shit ton of midichlorians. Like, it was a cheap way to decide we want to take this boy with us.
Absolutely. I mean, now that said, the fact that he pod races sort of gave them the inclination that he has Jedi-like reflexes because normal humans cannot pod race.
Yeah.
So that was sort of a nice intro to it. It wasn't just like, well, there's something about this kid here I want to test. So at least there was a reason he took that test or administered that test to him.
Yeah.
And what are actually? I mean, I know what midichlorians are, but what in real world situations, what would a midichlorians actually be? Is that like blood cells, or is that like a bacteria? Like, what would be the closest thing in real life that what midichlorians actually would represent? Do you know? Like, you say it's in their bloodstream, like
it would be. I don't even know if this is necessary. I don't think there is anything that could real world relate or even say it. But do you remember that episode of Futurama with the worms from that egg sandwich that Fry eats, and he gets these worms, and they makes him like smarter and stuff?
So it's almost like parasites. It's almost parasitic.
To a degree, yes. But
they like latch onto his blood almost if he has a lot of them.
Right. That's probably the best way of describing it. It's like helpful parasites, but that's also probably doing a disservice to midichlorians. But I guess that's probably the most useful or realistic analogy I can give you.
It's good enough for me.
So we'll get more into his turning further into the podcast, but one of the things you said, Haddix, was how convenient it was that they tested it and stuff. And one thing you'll see is convenience and forced seem to be a lot of themes that go on with the prequels. It's just the way they conveniently bring this character in, or they sort of force this thing into the story. And I think one of the issues is Lucas wanted to do too much and sort of focusing on the main thing. What people cared about was Anakin's turn to Vader. Above and beyond all else, that's what we wanted to see. Obi-Wan's relationship with him, that was another major point that we wanted to see. But he wanted to throw in, trade federations, the trade disputes, he threw in the origin of C-3PO and said, oh, Anakin was creating this robot C-3PO. I mean, that just seems unnecessary to the story, other than it throws C-3PO now into the prequels.
Yeah. And someone brought up a good point about how whether it was planned or was just on accident, and Lucas's whole backtracking thing, but throughout all the movies, I guess, C-3PO's line of bless them or thank the maker or whatever. I mean, we find out that that's Anakin, I guess. I mean, he's the one who technically made him, even though he's a mass-produced protocol droid. He was built from scrap parts for some god-awful reason. That was the part that I don't understand. Well, there was nothing that set him apart from any other protocol droid, but he was made from scratch by Anakin. So
right. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is they wanted to show you that he was very technologically savvy.
Yeah.
Which I understand. He's one of the best star pilots, and that's mentioned in the original trilogy. So I understand you want him to be like that, but I think the pod racing would have covered that end of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You wouldn't have had him have to develop C-3PO.
Again, I think it was an easy way to bring C-3PO into prequels.
Right.
You know?
And so we've mentioned pod racing a couple times, so let's just touch base on that really quick. Hougie, how did you feel about pod racing? Was it necessary to the movie? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Was it just a cash grab for toys and video games?
Well, it's definitely that.
Yeah.
If Lucas has anything to say about it, definitely that. Was it necessary for the story? No. Was it exciting at age 14? Yeah, I don't have a problem with the pod racing per se.
It made one of the best video games.
Yeah, and the thing too is that it's all about creating Anakin Skywalker. When we already know he's a fantastic. He's very savvy as far as for a 9-year-old or whatever, as far as like building robots. And now this guy, we find out later on he's a fantastic pod racer. Something once again that not only someone his age but his race is not really supposed to be able to do well, let alone or do at all, let alone do well. And so the pod racing was important to set the table for once, like you said, there was a reason why they wanted to bring him back to Coruscant. Right. So it was important for that reason. And no, I thought it was fine. I think once again it was a little kiddish. There was a lot of silliness involved in it. But
you know what bothered me the most? Yeah, and there definitely was. And I think I said this on the last podcast. I think Phantom Menace was the one most driven to children, to focus on children. And I think pod racing is a big part of showing that. But what bothered me the most about the pod racing wasn't the pod racing itself, wasn't him driving it or anything like that. It was all the little other children that they had working around with him, like jumping up and down and screaming, and
like little rascals of yeah.
It just annoyed me. I didn't need that in the movie. It's just such a small thing, but it bothers me. I don't know.
Yeah. It was as far as the actual race, was one of like the cooler scenes in the movie.
Yes, what I mean? and I think that was part of it too. Is of course one of the biggest things in the originals that they we talked about this before is you had the music, which by the way they brought John Williams back for this, and Duel of Fates is phenomenal. So I mean he does a great job there. But the other big thing is the visuals. And they CGI the hell out of these movies, and there's definitely some it almost, I think he was trying to show off, but he went overboard with it. But
it's almost like a kid at a candy store who like never had that candy before. I think he just did it like just nuts because he didn't have that kind of technology when he made the first movies in the 70s and 80s. Right. So then when you make this first one, you learn your lesson about overdoing it. Obviously, it wasn't done probably as bad, or not. I wouldn't say as bad, as egregious as the first one. But I understand why he did it. This is new technology, flaunt it. Just probably what he did in the 70s and 80s. He was cutting edge.
Right, and the pod racing, I think, is a good example of it done well. Like I think that whole scene holds up well to this day. I think it looks great.
Or the submarine scene and stuff like that was also a decent way of doing it too.
Right.
I actually like that scene.
And there's one particular character that we'll get into now, I suppose, that was completely CGI. And to the credit of George Lucas, I believe it was the first fully CGI'd character in any movie that was in a movie like that, like not like an animated movie or something like that where everything is. And that was nobody ever complained that the character looked fake or out of place or anything like that.
Yep.
That said, they have about 4 billion other complaints about this character, and that's Jar Jar Binks. The Jamaican stereotype, annoyingly supposed to be comedic relief at times, but rubs you the wrong way character. Haddix, what are your feelings on Jar Jar Binks?
I mean, I it was going back to what you said earlier. It was a forced character. Uh, I I mean, you
No, he
find
wasn't a
your
Jedi, dude. He doesn't have the Force.
well. I mean, hey, we're gonna get into that theory in a minute.
We
But
will get into that theory here in a minute.
like it just you would almost cringe when he was on camera, like because you just knew it wasn't gonna be good. I mean, it was just one of those types of things. He was kind of like that bumbling idiot that, like, I mean, I guess you can go into a whole bunch of examples. I mean, you could find to credit Jar Jar Binks, he's probably one of the most talked about characters just because of how many people hate him. You know what I mean? Like, people fucking hate that guy. So
He's comic relief like a toddler would be. Like sometimes he's silly and sometimes he's like, dude, go away. Like I know, go away for a little bit.
I don't recall any moment where I actually enjoyed him. There might have been times where he wasn't as bad, but there was not one moment where I was like, God, that was a good scene that Jar Jar was just in. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, there's literally nothing. There's scenes where he either is fine and you just are like, okay,
yeah,
or he just is like, God, he's annoying.
The only good thing about Jar Jar Binks, which someone pointed out, one of the posts I was reading today, was throughout the prequels, he is in the movies less and less as they go on.
Well, so, and that's a great segue into the next discussion on him. Is after he was obviously a big part of Phantom Menace. He traveled along with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan for most of it. He's there for the battles on Naboo. I mean, he's in a majority of the scenes. And of course, after the movie's released, and everyone blew up about him. I mean, just ripped him apart, said he was annoying, he was racist, he was stupid. The list goes on and on.
Most importantly, he was unnecessary.
Well, and very unnecessary. So Lucas, I think, cut out his part. Was like, well, now I'm not going to use him so much in episode 2, and then by episode 3, he's virtually unseen at that point. I mean, he's barely there.
Yeah.
And for those of you who I think, Kyle, have you read the Darth Jar Jar theory?
No, I was gonna let you guys jump on that. I've seen some excerpts, but I knew you guys were talking more about it.
Who's credited with like coming up with this?
So a guy on Reddit, his username is Lump Waru, come about 2 months ago or so, releases his theory that Jar Jar Binks was a trained Force user, knowing Sith collaborator, and will play a central role in The Force Awakens, was his theory. Now, basically what he says is Jar Jar was in fact a Sith Dark Lord. Like, he was the guy behind everything. And he goes on, and it's actually a really enjoyable read. So, I mean, if you guys are listening out there and are interested in fan theories whatsoever, this is a good one to read. But basically, he cuts scenes from the movie and shows scenes where Jar Jar does something. It's like, look, that's not a clumsy guy. That's somebody who's actually very tactical, very skilled. He's got martial arts training that you would see from a Jedi. The way he jumps into the lake at one point, when he's fighting in certain battles, it looks like he's just being clumsy, but he's actually very aware of his surroundings and is dodging this while he's killing this enemy and things like that. And he goes on, and a lot of it you're sitting there like, oh, okay, well that's that's a bit of a stretch, but it all kind of ties together really well. But the thing that really stuck out for me on this, and basically what the theory is that Jar Jar was working the whole time kind of behind the scenes. It was eventually going to reveal himself as this, him and Palpatine were co-conspirators. And it was eventually going to come out, but then because Lucas got blasted for him, he backed out on his original plan for Jar Jar and went different routes, which is why like Dooku sort of seems kind of tossed in there. And we'll talk about Dooku here shortly, and things like that. But what sticks out for me, the one thing that really caught my attention was that in Episode 5, Luke Skywalker goes to find the great Jedi Master Yoda, and he lands on Dagobah. And mind you, when you're first watching Episode 5, you don't know who Yoda's not. This common. Everybody knows Yoda now. Back then, nobody knew who Yoda was. So he lands there, and he's sitting there with R2, and this like creature comes around and starts crawling around and eating his food and throwing things and he's like, get out of there, and he's like, he's making noises and he's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it was much like Jar Jar. So this annoying character. You're like, what is he doing there? Now, shortly after, he's revealed to be Yoda, and it's like, this guy this little scrawny nothing who's kind of trying to make jokes, maybe a little funny, maybe borderline annoying, turns out to be this Jedi Master. Like, there's a lot of similarities you can pull with Jar Jar there, except for the fact that they didn't reveal Jar Jar to be a Darth Lord right then and there, which, if you think about it, if that was going to be it, that's something you hold to Episode 3 or something. I mean, that's something you hold back. And there was an interview with the guy who did the voice of Jar Jar, and they asked him basically something along the lines of like, what was your, were you supposed to do more with the character? And he basically said, yeah, my character was changed a lot. Our story arc for Jar Jar was changed. And he said Lucas went in another direction, something to that effect. Didn't really come out and say anything. But I mean, so you don't know, and Lucas hasn't come out. Nobody's come out and said exactly what. And it's fun to think about, and it's probably not the case. You could probably shoot a bunch of holes in this theory. But it's a cool read, anyhow.
It is. It really is. And I think I agree with you. I think the best argument for it is the comparison to Yoda, because as we know from multiple things in the prequels, they kind of mimic a lot of things that happened in the original trilogy. So that would be the perfect way to do it, except for, you're doing it for the dark side instead of the Jedi. So I agree with you. I think that was the biggest kind of, head nod towards him being right. I mean, it's probably not, like you said, but it is definitely a cool read. You should read it. It is really good.
I'll link it when this gets published in case anybody wants to read it.
Yeah, it's very entertaining.
So like I said, when you roll into, before we kind of get off of Episode 1, the one other character that really is discussed and not really done much with is Darth Maul. And Darth Maul had dual fates. I mean, that played during his lightsaber battles. He had the double-sided lightsaber, which was awesome. He looked badass. I mean, leading up to this movie, you thought Darth Maul was going to be like the coolest of cool. And what an underutilized character he was.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
The fact that Count Dooku, and listen, I'll talk more about Count Dooku later, and I like Count Dooku as a villain. Darth Maul just he was the reason why I wanted to see Episode 1. Him by himself. There was nothing else, because just the scene of the preview when we first saw like the first couple commercials of seeing this like horned, red-faced, like wearing black, just evil-looking guy pull out what looks like a regular lightsaber, and out comes the red saber, and then the other side shoots out the other end. I'm like, dude, you sold me. Like,
yeah, it's awesome.
Take my money. You've got me. The fact that he's used less than Dooku and Grievous it's unfortunate, because he, of all the subordinates of Sidious, he's the best as far as I'm concerned, as far as just the look, the attitude, just the potential. It's a shame that
such a waste of talent there. I couldn't agree more. So we roll into Episode 2, It's Attack of the Clones. And the big story here, again, it's still we're still going to center around Anakin going to the dark side. But you go through all of episode 1. He's a 9-year-old boy. He sort of helps him on the Battle of Naboo. He's flying a starship and with R2, and they blow up the shield generators and things like that. So he's a hero. He's a nice boy. You really see nothing dark about him, other than when he goes in front of the Jedi Council, and the Jedi Council says, "There's much sadness in you," and it's just because he misses his mom. And to your point, Haddix, that's where they kind of plot back to the, he's missing his mommy now kind of thing. And, they don't want to train, which, okay, they sit here and they say he's too old to be trained, right? So that's fine. He's a 9-year-old boy. They like to start him out real young, whatever. And Qui-Gon believes in him. And they say, no, well then when Qui-Gon dies, Obi-Wan, who's literally just made a Jedi Master like days
by default.
Prior, well, they said he was ready to go. So they make him that. But then he says, I'll train Anakin, right? The Jedi Council, full of like the brightest, strongest, best Jedi Masters that there is, have come to a conclusion that this Anakin, he's got this high midi-chlorian count. He could be this chosen one that was foretold in the prophecy. But they don't trust this turmoil that's going on with him. But they decide he's going to get trained anyways. So you know what? Let's just throw him to the guy that was literally just made a Jedi Master like that day. Let's make him train this guy. Let's go ahead just to prove that instead of
you're just throwing Kenobi under the bus.
It's not Kenobi's fault. I don't even think Kenobi wanted to do it at the time. It's just like he was like, well, Qui-Gon's was my former master. Like, I'm going to do his dying wish. I'm throwing the Jedi Council under the bus for saying, go ahead and do it, even though we just thought this was a terrible idea. Why don't we instead of saying like, hey, how about Master Yoda, the guy who's like the best Jedi Master there is, like he should be the one working with this touchy sort of prophecy-filling Jedi. No, let's give it to the guy who's had no experience whatsoever training anybody. I mean, was that crazy or is that just me?
Oh, yeah. Again, brings back the whole. God, what was the term we used? It was
convenient and forced.
Yeah, it was convenient. Yeah, so we obviously knew that Obi-Wan and Darth Vader had some type of connection because in the originals, they have that whole thing going. So it was a convenient way for them to, strike up a relationship between these two guys. So even though it was stupid, and these are supposed to be some of the brightest people, let alone the brightest Jedi.
Well, once again, it's hard to change that storyline when that was already established in the first 3 movies. I mean, he's referred to as his former master when Vader fights him. So that Obi-Wan was the person who was in charge of training Anakin Skywalker. We knew that since the beginning. Yes, the idea of this guy who is going to bring balance to the Force, he's the chosen one, he's going to be stronger than any Jedi or Sith that will ever live, and you're just going to give it to the guy that just got bumped up from the minors. Yeah, I do understand that doesn't make sense, but the problem is that was already established. It wasn't that was an idea that Lucas came up with in 99.
I agree with that, but I feel like they could have done a better job writing the plots of the first and second movie to make Obi-Wan either, a
little more established, maybe.
Not just becoming a Jedi Master and then getting, Anakin as his Padawan. If they start the movies off, I think everyone would have been fine if they started the movie off with Obi-Wan as a Jedi Master. Somehow, tied it in there. I don't think that would have been an issue.
And I think the reason they didn't is I think they were still trying to sort of establish this hierarchy of, okay, you have Jedi Masters, you have a Jedi Council, and every Jedi Master has a Padawan that learns under him. So that's sort of like how they want to do it instead of, and I guess they could have done that by having Obi-Wan as a Jedi Master, and then he's training somebody underneath him. But there was some usefulness killing Qui-Gon off, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, and then, the Qui-Gon, was the, Yoda makes that comment about Qui-Gon, being one of the most powerful, or as far as dying and becoming a part of the Force or whatever.
Yes, exactly. That's kind of
so.
Okay, so we move into episode 2, and Anakin, who, other than having this sadness about him, shows up, and all of a sudden now he's, I think it takes place...
It's 10 years after the first movie, so he's about 20.
He's, he's 20 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, he all of a sudden is this arrogant kid. Like, Obi-Wan must be the worst father figure that there can be. Like, he just let him, without a father whatsoever, Anakin was, like, the nicest boy in the world. He works under Obi-Wan, and now he's, like, this, like, arrogant jerk. And
yeah, I mean, you wonder how much of that is hearing that, you could be this this prophesied child that's supposed to be the strongest Jedi ever. You know what I mean?
Right.
People keep telling you that, then it kind of might give you a big head.
Give him a little bit, yeah. So he runs in, of course, they now run into Padme. And Padme, who was apparently only supposed to be 5 years older than Anakin in the first movie, they have Natalie Portman and this 9-year-old boy. It looked like there was like a good 15 years difference between them, at least 10.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And now he's got this like huge hard-on for her, and of course this whole second movie is their love story, and it has some of the cringiest love dialogue I have ever seen. The way Hayden Christensen delivers it, the way it's written, it is a combination of just awfulness, and he is borderline creepy when he talks to her, and he's like I feel like he was going to like chop her up and put her in a chest sometimes, the way he delivered some of his lines to her.
I think, so young Anakin, first off, the writing, again, was not very good throughout this whole trilogy for anybody, any character whatsoever. The great actors, like the Ewan, or however the fuck you say his name, McGregor.
Right? Ewan
McGregor.
Ewan McGregor. I mean, he was kind of able to transcend that because he's a great actor. But still, his fucking dialogue was horrible too. But Hayden Christensen was monotone the whole time, fucking ultra creepy, just bad at acting in general. I feel like the only scenes where he was good were the scenes where he didn't even say anything.
Right, almost like where he could just give that
stare, like that death stare,
because he did kind of look creepy at times, like the dark side took over him. So from that aspect of it, it like worked. But the minute the dude had to talk, it just came out bad.
Horrible.
It was like borderline. You didn't know whether you wanted to be like laugh because it's like, is this like, is this seriously happening right now? Or if you're like just felt bad that like this is actually happening right now.
Yeah.
Also, just an FYI too. I know that you guys were talking about the age difference and stuff. Natalie Portman was 16 when she was casted for the Phantom Menace, which was that was in '97. So then when she did Attack of the Clones, she was 19 or 20, which then made her and Hayden Christensen basically at about the same age.
Well, yeah, when those two were on there, they're about the same age. But her to that kid.
Oh yeah, she was six. Well, I mean, she was 16. He was 9 instead of 14 and 9.
Yeah.
2 years difference.
That was the. And again, I understand.
But how many 16-year-old girls are looking at a 9-year-old boy and like falling for him?
And how do you?
I don't think she was. I mean, I don't think there was any kind of love interest in the first movie.
I agree. Well, apparently there was, because all of a sudden in episode 2, he's like all nervous to see her, and he obviously had this crush on her, which is fine.
You're a 9-year-old boy, fucking hormones.
Every 9-year-old boy and every 30-year-old man has a crush on a 16-year-old girl at one point or another.
Hey, you speak for yourself, buddy.
There's that line in episode 1 where he asked her if she's an angel.
Right. That's actually his first speaking line, other than when he says that line about the whatever to the guy.
Which people were ripping apart on forums and stuff because it again is Lucas. Angels are kind of our mythos, and he's like bringing this into the Star Wars world, and then he tries to cover it up by saying like they're from the moon or someone's moon or something like that. Like just something stupid.
Right.
Again, just fucking everything up.
But you know what? I would have accepted it and called it ballsy and respectful if he just said, "Dude, I write this shit. There's angels. Go fuck off."
Well, I mean, he makes up everything, but I feel like there's just an inconsistency of
there's going to be a lot of inconsistency.
Yeah.
That's the least of the worries at that point is whether angels are part of the mythos or not. But so they force this love story, and of course, eventually they kiss after he pretty much puts himself on her, which is the other thing. So you've got Anakin, who's this, at this point, unstable Jedi Padawan, who's got a lot. They were already worried about him. And you got this no longer queen, right? She's just a senator at this point, who he has a thing for. And they decide the best thing to do is put the two of them off together with nobody else around. I mean, really the fault of the rise of the Empire is on the Jedi Council and the rest of this group of politicians who, were not smart enough to realize, what they're doing.
Yeah. Let me credit real quick good old Samuel L. J. He never liked Anakin from the beginning, or was always hesitant about training him as a Jedi. He kind of always had that, hesitation about him. So he's the only one on the Jedi Council that was smart enough, I guess. I don't know.
Yes, well, okay. So we'll talk about how smart he is here in a second. So basically they fall in love. They have this secret wedding, and it's whatever. It's fine. It's obviously setting up for the third movie. And the fact that the big things that happen in episode 2 is they fall in love, they get married, they have that secret wedding. Of course, Anakin gets cockier, his mother dies, he slaughters all the Sand People, so you see that darkness in him.
Yep.
And the clone army gets raised. The only other thing is...
Dooku.
That's what I was going to say. I know, Kyle, you wanted to speak briefly on Dooku, so if you want to say your piece on him and how he was another underutilized character.
Well, not so much in this one. He was pretty important in the second one.
But he kind of came out of nowhere, too.
Yeah, he's kind of like, oh, there he is. This is Count Dooku.
Right.
It would have been nice to get a little bit more of a backstory because he has a huge backstory, and as far as for anybody who actually has watched any of the Clone Wars, the cartoon series, he's a huge player in that, and he's very important. He's being the other Sith with how little Darth Maul is, little role he ended up playing, and then how pivotal of a role Dooku really is, not only for the storyline of the Sith and moving through the story arc of the movies, but also Anakin's maturation. Dooku's a big part of it as far as what Anakin ends up becoming. He plants the seeds of revenge on inside of Anakin, which then leads to Dooku's demise. Dooku's a fantastic character. He's second only to Darth Maul to me as far as a bad guy. Obviously Sidious is kind of like, I don't put Sidious in there because it's he's the main bad guy.
Do you not put Vader in that conversation either?
I like Dooku as far as being just like the evil. I like that there's a face to him. I like that there's emotion to a person. Vader obviously is more the ass kicker type of guy. I almost said like Boba Fett, but I'm not like Boba Fett. But the one thing I liked about Dooku is that he almost is like he's a person. He's a real person.
He's a person.
I always saw Vader as almost like just a soulless, emotionless killing machine until his redemption in Episode 6.
Right.
But Dooku is very conniving. He's very methodical. He is a true villain to me. Like he acts like a villain, talks like a villain. He has the mannerisms of a real villain. Whereas Darth Maul was not. Darth Maul was just evil looking and just a badass, kind of close to like a Darth Vader. That's why I like Dooku. Dooku was a much more of an intelligent type of character that he had a method to his madness, and it's a shame that he also was kind of short-lived. But I did appreciate when he was there.
Right. So you touched on it briefly, and this is probably the one other thing of note from Episode 2 before we wrap things up and go into Episode 3, and that is Boba Fett. And again, Lucas just needed to write origin stories for everybody possible, and while still butchering the main origin story that he should have been focusing on. And of course, he writes in the Boba Fett origin story, which of course Boba Fett is the clone son of Jango Fett, who's a bounty hunter in his own right.
Who, by the way, is a badass character. I like Jango Fett. He actually holds his own against Obi-Wan. They fight to a draw, basically.
They do fight to a draw. Now, that said, I think there are moments later in the movie where he could have killed Obi-Wan from far away, like just shot him and doesn't. So I guess maybe he's just an honorable guy.
And does that really explain just how powerful Mace Windu really is? Just because he almost effortlessly takes care of Jango Fett when Obi-Wan had to struggle to have a draw and probably could have been killed.
So, well, that's a good point, and it's a nice segue, I think, into Episode 3, because Mace Windu, of course, he seems like he's a pretty up there in the echelon of Jedi.
Yeah, he seems like second to Yoda.
Right. Yeah, he's right there, and maybe it's just because Samuel L. Jackson's playing him. But in fairness, it does seem like he's pretty big up there. So eventually, Sidious, Palpatine, who's now Supreme Chancellor, has all the power in the world. He is basically soon to be the Emperor. Reveals himself to Anakin, and tells Anakin, basically that he is the Dark Lord. He is the the Sith Lord, and Anakin goes to the Jedi Council and says, "Hey, guys, we fucked up. Palpatine is actually the guy we've been trying to figure out who this Dark Lord is." So Anakin says, "Let's go stop him." Mace Windu says, "No." Finally puts his foot down. This is the time that the Jedi Council gets smart and says, "You know what, Anakin, we're gonna keep you out of this one." Okay, that's probably a good move. So you're going against what you know to be the strongest, most powerful Sith Lord. He is your number one enemy. So what do you go in with? You take yourself and two jabronis, Jedis. They walk into the room, tell Palpatine, "Hey, we're basically putting you under arrest." Palpatine says no. Boom, boom. The other two guys are dead like that. And then there's a battle between Mace Windu and Palpatine.
I wanna jump in with two things real quick. Back to the Boba Fett thing. Lucas basically made him. He's a clone son of Jango Fett, which so are all the other clones.
They're altered clones, though. He's an unaltered clone.
Okay, so he's slightly better. Basically, he's another stormtrooper. I mean, it's slightly better than a stormtrooper at that point. I mean,
he is the stormtrooper, but he's not accelerated. They accelerate the growth on all the stormtrooper clones.
All he has to do is he's growing up now instead of just being an adult.
Right. So he has time to learn and develop all of his skills.
So other than that, I just feel like it was a poor the dude got a shitty death, and then he got a shitty origin story. Like, I mean,
Good. Might as well go full circle.
Yeah. But then back to the Mace Windu thing. I mean, I feel like I agree with you. You know, like, why don't you get Yoda and why don't you get everyone that's on the Jedi Council?
I think at that point Yoda's on another Is that when Yoda's with the Wookiees at that point?
I think it was because he ends up showing up later.
So I mean, in fairness, there are a lot of Jedi like spread out throughout the universe at this point because you see them all basically getting turned and killed. Yeah.
Well, in Mace Windu's defense, though, I feel like if Anakin doesn't get involved, he could have defeated Palpatine. He could have killed Palpatine.
That's fair too. Now, that's the part I think that bothers me the most is that scene at the end where Anakin, you're like, oh, he's making the right choice. He's going to, stop Sidious, and then he comes in there, and Mace Windu is basically about to kill Sidious. And then they do that stupid shit with the lightning bolt, and he blocks with the saber, and that's how they explain the scarred up face of Sidious. I hate that, but that's whatever.
Can someone also please explain to me if the Supreme Dark Lord of the Sith is in an apartment a couple blocks from you, how on God's green earth do you not sense that?
He didn't.
That's one of the abilities. That's why they say there's only two Sith Lords, or two Siths at any given time, is because they're so good at like subterfuge and secrecy and kind of working in the shadows. So that's just how powerful the dark side is it shrouds.
I'll say, didn't Palpatine make a comment that he was like blocking the Force or something like that? Like I was able to. I can't remember exactly.
I mean, I think they call it he can leave the Force at any time he wants to so that he doesn't like exude that aura. It's just always just kind of weird because you always hear like, especially in the first couple movies, where Luke can sense Vader, Vader can sense Luke when they're near each other, and that's always been kind of weird to me. Now, obviously, I can understand if Obi-Wan senses Anakin because they know each other, they can feel the presence because it's familiar, but. I don't know, when you're that supremely powerful, I feel like you should be somewhat noticed, unless it's really explained. I apologize for that. And Mace Windu, I think that there's been a lot of speculation that Palpatine felt Anakin was on his way, and was almost letting Mace Windu get the upper hand.
A great point, because I was going to say the same thing. I think to a degree as well, that he was just toying with Mace Windu and was holding his own just enough to keep himself alive, but was ultimately setting up for Anakin to basically make his jump to the dark side at that point. And I felt it was a little forced there when he kills Mace Windu, but
he lit his skeleton up.
Basically, Anakin wanted that power of the dark side to bring people back because of these visions of Padme dying in childbirth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how they're basically going to accelerate it. But I really think it was almost too accelerated because he goes from killing him to like, all right, I'm going to go slaughter a bunch of children. Like, dude doesn't play around. It's not like you're like, he kind of toe taps like, oh shit, I just killed Mace. Like, maybe I made a mistake. God, like, let me deal with this. He's like, man, I killed Mace. Like, all right, fuck, let me bow down. You call me Darth Vader. I'm gonna go kill some children. Like, he just went from 0 to 100 like that.
Well, and then that's just the power too of manipulation from the Dark Lord of the Sith. Once you've made crossover, but once you've made it, because even as soon as he does it, he feels bad, like kind of like when he killed all the Sand People. He has that like, oh my god, I killed them all, and he's crying, like he probably should never have done that. He had that same feeling when he killed Dooku when Palpatine told him to. He didn't need to, but the influence of the dark side from the Sith Dark Lord, pushes him to that point, and he knew he was at that point. He's at the point of no return, and Sidious has it. I mean, Sidious has a complete grasp of Anakin at that point.
Yeah, I mean but it was a quick jump, I think.
Yeah.
And we're kind of getting to the end here, and I mean, we could probably keep talking about a lot of things. There's a lot of things we haven't discussed yet. And ultimately, of course, Padme has the kids, and this we'll talk about another scene here in a minute. But basically, she has the kids, finds out it's twins. Of course, Vader doesn't know it's twins. Sidious lies and says that she died, so I think he's under the assumption he even have kids then at that point. They decide to split the kids up, and this is, again, the brilliance of the Jedis and the Republic at this point is, okay, let's split them up. The one guy's like, well, I'll go ahead and take the girl. Like, I always wanted a girl. So Princess Leia, I mean, when you're comparing the two lifestyles growing up, like, she got this, like, lavish lifestyle, and then the other one's like, you know what, we need to hide Anakin Skywalker's son. Where are we going to hide Anakin Skywalker's son? I got an idea. Let's put Anakin Skywalker's son under the adoption of Anakin's mother's
Brother.
the mother's like husband, like which would be like his half brother, and it's not like on Tatooine. Like if Vader had any idea he has a kid, like, well, let me go the first place I'll check is where I was born and with the family, the very few relatives I do have. Like, that seems like the worst hiding spot for Luke to be.
Yeah, where his mother is buried.
Right, exactly.
He's already got mommy issues, so if anytime he wanted to go back and visit her, he's on the same planet as his son. Yeah, that's not the best situation to have.
So I will say, though, leading up to that, of course, there's the lightsaber battle with Anakin and Obi-Wan, where ultimately Obi-Wan pretty much chops off every limb possible, and Anakin like falls into like a volcano of burning death. Meanwhile, you have the Yoda and Emperor lightsaber duel in that whole Senate hall where they're like throwing Senate pods at each other and stuff and using the Force. Like, to me, that back-to-back scene is the coolest lightsaber battle and one of like the coolest like fight scenes. Just the way they go back and forth. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I just absolutely love that scene.
Well, it also has to confirm that Palpatine had to have been like holding back and had that whole thing set up with Mace Windu, because if he's doing that with Mace Windu, and I think it's pretty understood that Yoda's the supreme Jedi Master in almost every facet in all disciplines, and then he's just going toe-to-toe with Yoda. I feel like he would have
and then eventually Yoda gets worn out and tired, and like that's it. Like, Sidious goes on his way, and Yoda's like, well, I'm going to go lay down in Dagobah and take a nap for the next 30 years.
Well, that's the difference between Yoda and Anakin. Sidious has the high ground, and Yoda gets the fuck out.
That's true.
Whereas Anakin loses all of his arms and legs.
Yeah, because Obi-Wan says, I have the high ground, and Anakin decides to try to take it. So we're winding down here. We're pretty much reaching the end. Last little tidbits. Haddix, I'll go with you first. What haven't we talked about that you want to talk about? A favorite scene, a favorite character, a story, anything from any of the prequels that you want to discuss?
Two or three things, and I'll do them real quick here. I thought that the intro of R2-D2 was a little stretched. Him being the only droid on that
of the four that survived.
I thought it was cool that they kind of just brought him in as a random droid on a ship. That part was okay.
Right.
But the fact that he survived and then they were praising this basic droid and had the queen in hiding go clean him off was like we didn't know she was the queen at that time, but the girl that told her to go clean knew that she was the queen. So you wouldn't tell the queen to go clean a droid. So that part was a little stretched for me. R2 being able to fly, and I know it's been explained at some points about how he just lost that ability or something.
That's a terrible explanation.
It was a horrible explanation, but again, would have changed many things that happened in the original trilogy if he could fly. a lot of things would have changed. So that was a little cheesy. As far as good things, though, I really liked that scene in the Senate chamber where they show all the different people, like you see, like the E.T., like the planet of E.T. Like that was cool to kind of show how big the universe was. You know, that was kind of like the first time you see all those different races in the same spot, other than, you know, maybe a couple of different, you know, like the cantina and shit like that.
Yeah, sure.
And I also really enjoyed the way they tied in the fact that Luke would have taken, you know, certain death over killing Vader to show that he was good, and, you know, the opposite of that in Anakin killing, you know, Dooku, and he did kill Dooku and kind of went to the bad side. You know, kind of shows you the difference between, you know, Luke and his father, I guess, or Anakin, whatever. You know, it kind of was a cool comparison between the two. You know, choosing not to kill over choosing to kill, and kind of setting that whole thing up.
Absolutely. How about you, Kyle? Favorite story, discussion point, whatever you wanted to talk about, something you hated, loved?
One thing I hated, and I've hit this a couple times, is the complete waste of good villains. I mean, we didn't even talk about General Grievous. Not saying he was my favorite in any way, shape, or form.
No, but there's definitely a huge backstory to him that was completely ignored. He was just tossed into the mix as well.
And also, just from just a looks perspective, obviously he was a cyborg. You know, I think he was supposed to be kind of more the ass kicker of Episode 3. Having 4 lightsabers, 2 of which he just has basically just spinning in the back.
That was almost Lucas's way of trying to one-up his lightsabers from, you know, they had the double-sided one. They had Yoda with the lightsaber in Episode 2, so they're like, well, how do we top that? Let's just give him 4 and have him just spin them like automatic because he's a robot. Or
and
part
just
robot.
I mean, it looks scary as shit. Like, if I'm a Jedi and I've never seen it before, that's fucking that's
you know,
horrifying.
It looks scary as he's walking up, like, oh shit. But then right when they're about to fight, he like stops doing that move and then he just starts twirling with all of them. And it's like,
well, I think he does it. I don't think he does it because it's a great move. I think he does it as more of like he tries to almost distract and instill fear into it. So yeah, I was a bit bummed about just, you know, the quick departures of Darth Maul, Dooku, and Grievous. Once again, I love Dooku. I wish they did more with him. It was cool seeing him fight Yoda, pretty much to a draw. Also, I'm pretty sure Yoda probably would have overcame if it wouldn't. I think even Dooku knew that, and that's why he probably escaped.
Peaced out. Yeah,
he kind of peaced out when he probably should have. But ultimately, the thing that no one here wants to talk about is, as bad as these movies are, they're good because they introduced Star Wars. They made me a fan of Star Wars. If it wasn't for these movies, if they had not made 1, 2, and 3, I would have not got back into being interested in watching 4, 5, and 6. So as bad as any of this, as anybody wants to say, the production, the awkwardness of, you know, the romance scenes, and once again everything else that we've kind of complained about, it's still it opened up the fascination of this world to a new generation, and I have to at least appreciate it for that.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And it's, you know, at the end of the day, a bad Star Wars movie is still a Star Wars movie. And you have to just really enjoy the fact that you're watching Star Wars. You know, at the time, we're thinking, when we saw Revenge of the Sith, it's like, this is the last Star Wars movie, but we were lucky enough to see it in theaters, to see these, you know, come out. And you just appreciate the fact that these movies that came out in the, you know, late 70s and early to mid 80s, that there's another set of them, another trilogy that we got to experience. And it was awesome to be able, part of that. And while they have definitely their moments and things that we don't like, and we've probably spent more time today bashing the movies than really praising them. That's not to say that there was not plenty of good that came out of these movies, just like you said. And
I think they ended on a good note with episode 3, because episode 3 actually legitimately was a good one.
I enjoyed episode 3 a lot, and overall I didn't. While Phantom Menace is the worst of the 6, it was still not a terrible, terrible movie or anything like that. Like, I'll still sit down and enjoy watching it for what it is. But I think the reason, and this is what I'm going to end it on in my thing, is the prequels were basically a platform for Vader's origin. That is why the prequels, that's why episode 1, 2, and 3 are episode 1, 2, and 3, is because Vader, they were going to tell a story of Vader's turn to the dark side. And I think ultimately Lucas's story of how Anakin went from who he was to where he became fell flat on its face. And that's the most disappointing thing for me in the trilogy, is that they could have done so much more with that, and instead you get a annoying little pipsqueak of a 9-year-old boy turned into a whiny adolescent as he's going through his creepy love of Padme, and then all of a sudden you only see the Vader character for the last 30 seconds or so, and basically his line that is made famous is the "no,"
yeah.
It's just unfortunate that that's the way it went. But that said, like you said, Kyle, it got us all psyched into the movies. They're still pretty enjoyable, all the bad stuff aside. They could have been done better, sure, but they kept things going, and now we're at a point where Disney realized how much money it was making, bought out Lucas, and now we get all kinds of Star Wars movies. But more importantly, we'll have Episode 7, The Force Awakens, which, of course, came out in December. We've all watched it. Haddix and I have watched it twice now. And next week, podcast listeners, we're going to be able to talk all about it. So if you haven't seen it yet, go see it. We're going to spoil the shit out of it. Otherwise, if you haven't, we'll talk all about Episode 7, what we liked, what we didn't, our theories going forward, all that good stuff. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So let us know what you think, what you thought about the prequels. Feedback, we'll appreciate it. Anything at Pseudo Nerd Pod on the Twitter.
You just sounded like a 80-year-old man when you said on the Twitter.
On the Twitter.
On that Twitter machine.
So like Jeff Phelps. Put up on the Twitter.
So if there's nothing else you got to say, either of you gentlemen, anything? Nope. Final notes?
Fuck you, Haddix.
That was not cool.
Nice. Well then, from the frozen tundra that is Lake Erie to the windy shores of the San Francisco Bay, I'm Josh Kiser. He's Haddix. He's Hougie. We'll see you guys next time.
See ya.